Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host of Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Mitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast. We have with us Patrick Dugan. He is a trading systems designer at MetaLiquid and also a board member at the Omni Foundation. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about this Omni Foundation. It's a Bitcoin 2.0 layer for the blockchain. And, maybe you can give us a little bit of background, like what exactly are you doing at MetaLiquid and over at the Omni Foundation?
Yeah, so I write trading systems in Node.js and do a lot of arbitrage in Bitcoin. And I'm going to be involved in using that technology in my capacity as a board member of the Omni Foundation, which I stepped up. I volunteered to join back in April in order to systematically manage about 15% of the Omni money supply that the foundation holds and providing liquidity. So people have complained a lot about how Mastercoin, which we're in the process of rebranding as Omni, has had pretty poor liquidity, and I'm trying to quantitatively solve that. So that's where these two roles meet.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. Yeah, because I've noticed that the Mastercoin or OmniCoin has $500,000 a day of liquidity, when it actually seems that there's quite a bit of utility from it. For example, the MadeSafe coin that's out there. We've interviewed Reeve Collins from Tether, and from what I understand, Tether sits on top of the Omni layer. So, I'm pretty excited about this. When we're talking about these 2.0 projects, Ethereum, Counterparty, they took like a year to deliver, and so far, it's been almost 2 years since the crowd sale with the Omni protocol. Like, what's up? What's up with that?
Well, okay, so it's a good thing to address. So I got involved in the project in February of 2014, but it did the crowd sale about 8 months prior to that. So in that interval, they started out, I think, a bit naively about best practices in technology development and software development, and they wanted to do everything decentralized. There was at that time, a very kind of idealistic sense about, let's like decentralize everything, including how we work. So they were doing it through bounties. One of the folks who showed up for that was Zathras, which I don't believe is his legal name, but so he goes by Zathras. And Zathras is a very seasoned developer who has been one of a few people who have stuck with the project throughout the duration, and he's really been the one who's brought it across the finish line with a very competent C++ implementation of what's basically Bitcoin Qt, but it has all these added features. So that was one good thing to come out of that early time, but then and also the Counterparty guys got involved, and then they were like, okay, this is like, let's just do our own thing. So they went and they did their own thing. Anyway, so in the middle part of this time frame was a middle year where everything was funded. They were hiring people. That's when Craig Sellers got involved, and he's another person who's been very intensely involved and loyally involved through the duration. And they realized, okay, like the tools that we built in the last 10 months or so, they were using Obelisk and libbitcoin derivatives. And so they're having syncing issues. And they're like, okay, we just got to do one reference implementation as opposed to what Ethereum did, where they did 3, right? Which seemed like a good idea, but it's just focus on doing one. So they focused on a C++ fork of Bitcoin Qt. So everything is easy to integrate. And they're chipping along with that. And then the last through 2015, they ran out of Bitcoin, and I'm not going to get into the backroom dealings involved in that, but basically the dedication of myself and Craig and Zathras and Dex and Adam, who did the Omni wallet, has allowed, and if I'm going to mention everyone, Sean Gilligan, who did Omni J, which is the Java implementation to allow mobile. Folks have gotten involved, have stayed involved despite needing to do other work, and we've managed to bring it across the finish line. And by the time this podcast launches, we should be a couple of weeks into being live on the DEX.
Well, that's exciting. So what exactly is like Omni, relative to some of the other projects out there? We've got like colored coins, we've got Counterparty, Symbiont, and you've talked about Bitcoin QT. One thing I like about omniwallet.org is that you can actually manage the private keys to, say, your MadeSafe coins on in your Armory wallet, so they're complete cold storage, but at the same time you can craft your offline transaction using omniwallet.org. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like, what exactly is this functionality that's being built with this second layer on top of Bitcoin using the Omni protocol?
Sure. So I'm going to shotgun some technical things. So I just want to mention that they've done some work with BitCo on integrating multisig as well. So the basic idea of a colored coin is that you're marking Bitcoin, specific Bitcoin, as so-and-so asset, right? But there's a fungibility problem with that. And also then you're treating your, $1 million, quote unquote, which is represented as a tiny bit of Bitcoin, like literally. And that's kind of problematic for transacting. Whereas with Counterparty and Omni, you're just looking at transaction outputs as the relevant continuation of a Merkle branch. Merkle branch is like, a set maybe it's not the right. All right. I'm slipping on technical language here, but I'll send
Merkle branches, tree change, Merkle roots, like it's all Greek to everybody, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So basically it's like a stamp as opposed to a commemorative coin, if you will. So I'll send you a transaction for 5,000 Satoshis, whatever the minimum is, the spam limit on the network. And then on the back of that stamp is like, here's $100, right? Or here's 1,000 MadeSafe.
Now, does it go into the op return code? Because, I've seen quite a bit of these transactions. There'll be like 5,775 Satoshis in MadeSafe coin instances. Do you then embed stuff into the op return code? Like, how exactly do you get this into the Bitcoin blockchain so that it can then be parsed by these colored coin wallets?
Right now, it's just unspent transaction outputs that are used to mark a movement of a meta layer property from one address to another. One of the things that Zathras has done a really good job with this year is migrating to the pay to store hash environment. That remember last year when everybody was kvetching about Bitcoin 2.0 and how it was going to pollute the blockchain with all this data. Well, they came up with a compromise, which is you pay a little bit more fee and then you can store a hash and clean it up. So we've moved already to this cleaner aspect, and I do believe that the parsing in the Omnicore database does an op return search in order to be able to quickly pull out, okay, here are all the addresses that contain this property.
And this was also part of didn't the total amount also get decreased that could actually be stored? Like it got decreased to 140 characters or something like that?
Yeah, it was
transaction.
The debate was 80 bytes versus 40 bytes, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and they went with 40, and 40 is enough that you can have a hash and an ID number, and that's enough for basic stuff. They didn't want people to get too creative with what they could do with the op return. But yeah, it's definitely useful for looking up what other meta layer properties there are in an efficient way.
And this all gets kind of to the heart of Bitcoin, that it's programmable trust. Right? And so
yes.
Once you're able to start doing this type of stuff, then we can have decentralized banking, we can have atomic transactions taking place. Like maybe you can get into that a little bit.
Okay, so I'm glad that you brought up decentralized banking. So you're familiar with how centralized banking works, right? I mean,
they take your money and then they don't give it back. just ask the Greeks about that, right?
Well, sometimes they give it back. Yeah, they give it back until they don't give it back. Yeah,
but they have very sticky fingers on the private keys of the assets. Whether it's currency controls, whether it's AML KYC uses an excuse to confiscate assets, whether it's civil forfeiture. I mean, whatever it is, when you have centralized banking, you centralize the private keys that they give you possession or dominion or control over the assets. And so then once all those middlemen have the private keys in their grubby little fingers, they don't like to let those keys pass back to the true owners or beneficial owners of the property. So I mean, how's decentralized banking kind of work in this whole paradigm?
Yeah, so like there's no private key to the small balance that I keep in my Bank of America account, right? It's just like a notional liability, right?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, there is a private key held to those dollars that are at the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has those private keys, right?
There are serial numbers associated with the $100 bills, but those $100 bills are a small fraction of the money supply.
Yeah,
so
well, I mean, most
basically
of them are digital now.
So they've been creating money backed against assets, right? And those assets used to be gold under the Bretton Woods thing. And then at post-Nixon, it became basically taking debt as your asset to issue more money and so on, right? And this has happened at the domestic level. I think a lot of people now, since like Ron Paul came out like 7 or 8 years ago, a lot of people get the idea that the banks are creating more money by loaning people money. It's new money. They go spend it. New deposits, thus banks can loan more. People get that, but also international derivatives have created a lot of money supply at the international level. So this is taking things that are considered assets, but may be problematic in a secular debt conflagration, which we may be on the verge of.
Or have already gone through if people have read The Big Short or, some of the other housing crisis stuff.
Right. So what happened in 2008 was that this euro-dollar system of international banks using derivatives to hedge, creating these synthetic dollars, that money supply started to unwind, and then central banks had to come in and type up trillions of dollars in order to keep the whole thing chugging along. And it kind of worked for about 7 or 8 years. We're about 7 years now. But now we're seeing Brazil, we're seeing China. These are commodity export-oriented countries that live on this system. And there are fewer dollars because all these synthetic dollars are getting unwound, and therefore you need to pay more for your dollar to go pay back. And so decentralized banking is the solution to all of this mess, and it's the way. Even if centralized bank institutions that are regulated and are doing central bank sanctioned activity, they're going to have to migrate towards clearing ledgers. Maybe they buy it from Blythe Masters, but they're going to have to take at least a couple of steps in this direction. So what I foresee is that assets like gold or assets like real estate securities, so this is like, a lot of people can go, okay, those things have value, or assets like Bitcoin, which has zero counterparty risk because it's specie money on that ledger, or assets like Omni or assets like Ethereum could be used as the collateral for the issuance of dollars, for the issuance of euros, for the issuance of whatever denomination you want. And the way that is possible is through smart contracts, which hedge those positions, right? So back when Bitcoin was rallying in July during the Greek panic, the premium in the OKCoin futures, which are the most liquid, or not most liquid, but the most highly traded thing in Bitcoin right now, that premium it was like typically about like a 1.5% a week. You could like short the weekly contract, and then at the expiration you would have maybe a little more Bitcoin, maybe a little bit less, but the dollar value would be 1.5% higher, and you do that every week. That's pretty good, right? And it got to a point where it was briefly trading at like a 30-40% premium. It was like overnight there was like a spike. It was pretty ridiculous.
Well, so OKCoin is definitely the most solid exchange out there.
Yeah, you're right. I'll do disclaimer about keeping your funds there. I mean, I trade there because it's where the volume is, but yeah, I wouldn't.
Is it real volume? I've always been kind of suspicious. Is it real volume over there?
They probably, I don't want to say definitely, but probably self-trade on the zero fee CNY exchange, or do other things to kind of pump up the volume. But those are still orders you can interact with, so I don't consider that truly fake. And then the futures, there's a 3 basis point fee, which is nice and lean, and it isn't super liquid the way that the CNY is. So I think that like they did 1.25 million Bitcoins worth of trade in one of those big up days back in July. I think that's real volume, and it's because people can take a lot of leverage, so they end up flipping a lot of contracts, and and then, they're super skittish about it. So if it moves a buck, they'll try to, because it's a big profit to them, they'll take it. So I think those are legitimate volumes.
With the leveraged contracts over there, is OKCoin the one that socializes the losses so against the people who traded correctly?
They haven't had to do that though since November.
There was because that's just so shady.
Yeah. So, BitMax is another centralized one that's trying to be a little more trustworthy than them, and they've got 25x leverage on their speculative contracts, and then they have a hedging contract where they'll never socialize losses, and then the speculative one, it's there's 25x leverage. If Bitcoin blows out 30% overnight and crashes back down, maybe some people have to claw it back, but they spell that out. And likewise, OKCoin has an insurance fund. So these are sort of little patchwork attempts to try to solve the issue of counterparty risk.
Yeah, because that's what we're getting at, right? We've got these derivatives, daisy chain effect, with the dollar strengthening and is acting like a margin call across the world, causing currency crises. Now China's recently devalued something like 5%. We've had Puerto Rico go into actual bond default. Greece is in a mess. Oh yeah. Puerto Rico actually defaulted, which
they missed
makes
payment?
They missed $72 million payment, and then they're going to default on another payment here pretty soon. So it makes me wonder if that's going to be triggering the credit default swaps, and then what effects that going to have on these bond insurers and reinsurers, on up the chain. I mean, because as Buffett says, these are daisy chain financial weapons of mass destruction, and then further connecting the dot the Tianjin port explosion, it makes you wonder was that kind of retaliation for China wanting to get into the SDR and then being denied, and instead re-reporting their gold supply holdings over 60% higher, and then China's come out again with another 19 tons, another 5% increase. So we're in a currency war right now, and
we will find out that China has over 10,000 tons in the country, and they're going for 20 at some point. But it's pretty easy for a central bank to devalue a currency when their balance of payments is fitting. All you have to do is stop printing your own currency to go and do swaps for the other currency and basically get a really heavy losing position. If you just stop doing that, then the currency will tend to find its market price, right? And they basically just threw in the towel like Switzerland did and everybody else. There's this collective sense that the central planners can't keep the lid on things. And just another technical point, the credit default swaps may net out tens of billions of dollars on some of these things. And of course, if you had a worldwide chain, that would be a big deal. But the really big deal are the currency swaps and the interest rate swaps, which have notional values in the hundreds of
right, because when you have a counterparty failure due to inability to properly perfect the collateral or whatever it is, notional becomes nominal, right?
Yeah, well, that's the deflationista argument, right? And
I wrote a book about this. I wrote a book about this back in 2008, the great credit contraction, and it's all playing out. Capital's seeking the safer, more liquid assets. We want to remove the layers between us and our private keys. We want to remove our layers between us and financial assets, getting into tangibles, whether it's gold or Bitcoin. And this gets to the heart of what we're talking about with this decentralized banking, right?
Yeah, so let's get back to that. So basically, it's now possible for people to own their money in the realest sense you can. The gold bugs say that if you don't hold it, you don't own it.
But even more so than gold, because we've been able to distill it down to a precious number instead of a precious metal that you have to have physical possession of. And so now we've got just an intangible number that you need to have properly secured. And then it can't be confiscated in that sense. Gold can.
A judge could put you in contempt of court for not, signing a transaction to turn it over to them. But
it'll be interesting, the due process implications, because there's no way to affirmatively prove due to plausible deniability that you actually do have control of a private key.
Yeah. Too bad Ross Ulbricht couldn't have capitalized on that one, right?
Well, he had a lot of other problems with his defense, like the fact that he probably did it.
Yeah. Anyways, I will not speak ill of the imprisoned, but yeah. So with decentralized banking, you can really own your money in a strong sense, and you can have a hedge that is backed by smart contracts. So one of the main things that I've done with the Omni project in the R&D side is trying to design decentralized futures contracts. And that's a bounty that probably will still be open by the time this goes live. And I want to get more people involved in it. I think I've got 4,000 or 5,000 Omnis earmarked as a bounty reward for that. And so right now that's worth about 10K, and I think could potentially be worth closer to 50K as we roll out. And the value that it's going to add to the Omni token, of course, is going to really manifest. Yeah. So there is an issue that you were talking about the socialization of losses, and so far none of these centralized Bitcoin futures exchanges have had to dip into that again, even with some pretty decent volatility recently. But wouldn't it be like amazing if we could just do away with that? And it's like, here's Bitcoin on the blockchain. It's in a smart contract. So while Symbiont is trying to take functionality like what Ethereum has and do it on Bitcoin, and Ethereum is trying to like be the future in like the most comprehensive sense possible, what we want Omni to be is a really solid C++ basis for moving money around, trading money over the decentralized exchange or assets of any kind. And I want to get this futures contract baked into the database layer and the almost like hard coded so that we can do these derivative settlements really effectively. And once we have that basis, then it's going to be possible to take Omni as collateral for those contracts and get exposure to the S&P or whatever you want, or to be holding dollars where if there's a premium, let's say Omni manages to appreciate from its $1 million market cap to a higher amount, then there's going to be a speculative demand, and then there's going to be a contract premium. So you could take your Omnis and create dollars that are yielding 1% a week or whatever that contract premium is. And then a little bit later, we're going to open this up so that you can do it with Tether dollars, you can do it with whomever's gold deposit tokens, and so on, and back your money in that sense. And potentially there's some other technologies that I'm looking at, like an honorable mention to Mirror X's contract, which I think they're working off of Bitcoin D in a different direction than the Omni core is a fork of Bitcoin D as well, which is why exchanges have found it easy to integrate because they already have Bitcoin D integrated, so they just add more RPC calls, basically.
Yeah,
a little more than that.
I mean, all of this is just super fascinating. We're talking about true financial innovation happening with Bitcoin, distributed consensus, programmable trust, all of these things. And you really think that this could be a solution to this problem that has no practical solution, this great critical traction.
Yeah, I think at some level, the entire world's going to have to migrate into this over the next 5-10 years. And whether they do it in a sort of, in a way that like Chris DeRose would not approve, like some permission ledgers and stuff like that is okay. But yeah, I mean, I definitely prefer to own my money, right? So I'd like to decentralize. Yeah, exactly.
So where can people find you if they want to learn more?
I am publishing analysis regularly at metaliquid.io, and we're going to have a link in line for getting Omni and downloading that software and playing around with that.
And I think omnilayer.org is where we're able to learn more about the Omni protocol, and then also omni.foundation. It looks like those are the two places where we can learn more about the Omni Foundation. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. We've had Patrick Dugan, the trading system designer at MetaLiquid and a board member at the Omni Foundation. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.